You've likely seen the videos that have been all over YouTube about copyrights and music related content, especially from creators like the Professor of Rock, Adam Reeder, and Rick Beato, and then some commentary from Rhett Shull. And they're all ostensibly saying the same thing, is that they're spending hundreds of hours, thousands of hours creating this content that is educational in nature. And by way of featuring excerpts of that music, that their entire video is penalized as a consequence, and that the idea of fair use is completely in the hands of the copyright holder. So that being the record labels and the artists or the publishers or whoever it is that owns the rights to the music, it's in their hands as to whether they accept or deny any sort of dispute for the reasons of fair use. And so it creates this asymmetry where they receive all the benefits of the content of, let's say, somebody like a Professor of Rock who has, almost 2 million subs, or a Rick Beato with 5 million plus subs, or fill in the blank creator, but they don't receive any of the benefits of their time in creation. And I can say, as somebody who is creating interview videos that are certainly similar in nature to those from Professor of Rock and those from Rick Beato and other creators in the space, where I'm having session musicians that played on hit songs recreate their original parts to the original multi-tracks, and then discussing sort of elements of the session and working with the artist in the development of the song. We've not had any of those videos in 30 or more videos that are 1 to 2.5 hours long. Those are not monetized either. And to give you a sense of sort of the loss on that, I'm looking through a spreadsheet here just off screen of what these videos cost, because I track them from the editing expenses to the videographer expenses to having to rent a studio, especially if we're flying to somebody who maybe doesn't have a home studio, the engineer expense if we have to have an engineer there, rental cars, hotels, food and accommodations for the time of the shoot. And they average $3,700 on the low end and $6,200 on the high end. And so there's quite a range that's in there. And I'm not doing this with an exorbitant budget. Like these are kind of like the real costs of what it takes to produce a 1 to 2 hour interview and have all those other resources for recording it and capturing the dialogue and then having somebody put it all together and edit it. And then, of course, getting there and back. These are real costs. And when you think about the fact that you're putting this all out there sort of on speculation, or I guess at this point, it's not even really speculation. You put it out there and 100% of the revenue generated from the content that's created all goes to the record label. That is a pretty major asymmetry in terms of they, have their fingers on the scales and we don't get anything for it. And I know that there's been a lot talked about that there should be some sort of solution. I haven't yet heard at the time making this video of any actionable solution. And I was considering this as I was speaking to an attorney today about Klon Centaurs and this lawsuit that's happening right now in the pedal world. And if you don't know, my real job is that I manufacture guitar pedals under the name Vertex Effects, and that's what we primarily are, even though on YouTube that seems to be a fraction of the content that we create, and a lot of it is interview-related content. And we were doing a podcast about this sort of the goings on of copyright and trademark related stuff. And at the end of the conversation, I happened to bring this up about some of the things that are going on around fair use. And she had some really interesting perspectives about the money side of things and how that relates to sort of the legal definition. And it's curious because her perspective was, as an attorney who's tried cases in similar fields, was that when you're saying fair use, you also cannot be making money. So not only is the expectation that the label doesn't make money, but if it's truly fair use and you're using it in your videos, then you also cannot be making money. So in other words, both parties make no money. There's no monetization on either side. And I thought that that was an interesting caveat to sort of the narrative that we've heard. And I don't know that maybe she doesn't have all the information, or maybe I explained it improperly, which led her to the conclusion that she delivered to me. But it sounded like, from hearing Rick's conversation about this, is that there was a way to get these claims overturned. And I don't know if he was talking about blocked claims or whether he was talking about copyright claims, which are just the money now goes to the label instead of going to Rick. And so I'm curious about a clarification on that point. But I'm also curious about what is the legal argument then that is being made if it is in fact that he's getting copyright claims overturned and he is now getting revenue sent back to him from the videos and whatever they're generating. What is that claim? Because it seems like that would be really important information if our commitment as a community is for people to be able to fight with the same equipment, the same weapons against the record labels, that we would sort of need to know how it is that we're supposed to strategize in order to win those fights. And so I'm hoping that if anything comes out of this between the work that Adam Reeder is doing in sort of escalating this with the record labels and also Rick, that there's some mechanism with which they can share it with smaller creators so that they too can benefit from being able to monetize their content. The other thing I thought about before I heard this is how might a revenue share look that might be appropriate? And I think that one thing that it could look like is that I do think there needs to be some acknowledgement of the artist, because I think that the record labels, when I've spoken with them, and I'll tell you a story about a time that I did get something whitelisted, and that's the term that they use to let content through. I think that their perspective is that there needs to be some acknowledgement of the art, because there isn't any dialogue to be had about a piece of music unless the piece of music already is in existence, and there has to be some amount of creativity and something that is put forward by the artist that is of interest to talk about. And so I would look at it almost like a licensing agreement, where typically a licensing might be a 12 to 15% split, where the artist would get some percentage, that percentage is a 12 to 15% of the revenue, and then the rest would go back to the creator. So there's an acknowledgement that the piece of music is there and that there was time and energy and effort that was put into that, and there's an acknowledgement of that. But there's also acknowledgement that the creator is bringing attention, in many cases like Rick and with Adam, the professor of rock, they're bringing attention to music that in many cases hasn't been relevant in 30 or 40 years, and to artists that haven't really been in the forefront for that amount of time. And so they're doing nothing except celebrating and bringing attention to things that have been fairly dormant in the industry for some period of time. So I think that there also needs to be an acknowledgement of that. And as you can see, these are not just discretionary expenses. It costs a significant amount to put on these videos, and I presume that their budgets for videos are somewhat similar to what I'm paying to create the videos that we do. The interesting story about the whitelisting thing, or getting videos passed through, the one video we were able to do this with was with an artist named John Leventhal, and he was a producer and a writer with Sean Colvin and did songs like Sunny Came Home. He was involved in the production of Walking in Memphis, and then also put out a solo record and did a record with William Bell, the Stax legend, out in Memphis. And we were able to get all the music whitelisted, but it took over 3 months for that to happen, from the time the video was complete to the time that all the music was able to get passed through the various record labels that all those pieces of music were on. And the reason why it took so long, as similarly mentioned in some of the videos by Rick and by Adam, the professor of rock, was that you're generally not starting with the decision makers. You're generally starting with some junior associate or somebody who is an intern that kind of deals with the claims of YouTube. And then it gets escalated slowly over time and then gets to somebody who can actually make a decision about it, even though we had the express written and verbal, the express verbal and written permission from John Leventhal himself and or the artists that were featured. And even with that, it was a very difficult and arduous process to get stuff moved through. And from a content perspective, if you've spent thousands of dollars in production and then are sitting on your hands for 3 months, that's also a difficult thing and sort of makes it untenable. If that is the only mechanism by which you can get stuff whitelisted is going back and forth with somebody at a record label and all the different records that or labels that might have been featured in the video, and then trying to get individualized permission on a specific video link, because you have to provide them the link of the completed video, and then they review it and they say, okay, well, this is the part that has our music, and okay, we're going to whitelist that and release it from any sort of claim. And so it's a difficult and involved process, and that's the only experience I've had with that. And otherwise, everything else just gets immediately hit with copyrights, and we've accepted that we're not making any money on these videos, and this is why we've had to have sponsors on almost every single interview video that we have, because the cost is so great to tolerate that we can't afford to continue to do them unless we had support from outside entities. So in any case, I hope that gives some perspective about, from somebody who is a creator from another point of view. And I'm really interested to see how this unfolds with Adam and with Rick, and whether there are some actual tangible things that they'll share with the community, so that it's not just sort of galvanizing support from people that will verbally affirm, like, yeah, like, go do it. And hopefully they find something that they can bring back to us and say, hey, this is how you have to fight this fight, and these are the strategies that we're using, and we found this to be effective. Because, man, I would love to be able to monetize some of these videos, because, again, we put so much money and effort into them, and I don't expect to make all the money, but I think to the degree with which we're providing educational content, we're providing stories, and we're helping to, I hope, to help cement the legacy of some of these artists that have been so influential in music, that we're doing a service to the musical community and in our own communities, and into the history of some of these amazing bands and musicians and artists and session players that may not otherwise be known by the current generation of players, or even my generation of players in many cases. So looking forward to seeing how that goes. I'm wishing them all the best of luck, and I'm hoping that they'll share it with us as they learn more. And again, appreciate everybody here who has supported our channel and has been a subscriber and has watched our interview videos, or has joined us on Patreon or any of the other places where you can support us outside of YouTube. It's a hugely important thing, and I think as you heard about how much things cost, it's your support is not insignificant. It's a valuable part of being able to make interviews like this and content like this possible, because you can see there's not a lot of agreement from the record label side to make this happen. So thank you for everything that you do out there to our listeners and subscribers, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next video.